Welcome to the Good Bad Mad podcast, a show that's here to share the ins and outs of creative careers, connecting the aspirational with the experienced, with your host, me, Meg Ellis. My guest for this episode is award-winning cinematographer Denson Baker. Now, Denson has worked on feature films, music videos, documentaries, and commercials. He'll talk us through his role throughout the filmmaking process, and we'll use the luminaries as a bit of a case study. Hope you enjoy it. Denson, hi.
Hey, how are you, Meg?
How are you? Are you in London at the moment then?
I am, yes. Yeah, although going to be heading up to the West Midlands in a couple of weeks to start pre-production on the next project.
Very exciting. Am I allowed to ask what it is?
Yeah, you can. It's called The Colour Room. It hasn't been announced yet, so it's not that I can't say that much about it, but probably shouldn't. I'm a little bit superstitious as well.
Fair enough.
I find if you start talking too much about a project that hasn't started yet, it sometimes doesn't work out the way you hoped. And then you're embarrassed because then people are saying, what happened to that project you were doing?
I see. No, I get that. I get that. You hype it up a bit too much for people.
Yeah.
I see. Well, I'm so glad
it's a really good one.
Work.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a long time coming. This is one we were to be shooting last year, and now it's all finally back on.
Oh, well, good for you. Well done.
Very happy to. Yeah, and it's one that my wife's directing. I'm not sure if you're aware, my wife's a director. We've done a number of films and TV shows together.
I did. I'm going to ask about that.
Oh, okay.
Is it what's it like working with your director and wife at the same time? So thank you so much for agreeing to have a chat with me today.
Pleasure.
Our whole vibe is trying to find out a bit more about kind of the ins and outs of certain roles within creative industries, and just really kind of bring the more unusual roles some clarity to those who are interested in maybe just how art is made, but also for those who want to kind of think about pursuing these roles themselves. So I guess we should kind of start with, what does a cinematographer do? How would you kind of surmise your role?
Yeah, well, in short, the cinematographer is the one who has the role of creating the visual style of a movie, TV series, commercial, music video. It's lighting, it's camera, it's lensing, it's framing, and the production designer will put what's in front of the camera, and then it's my role to capture it from the right angles and collaborate with those around me to create the visual style. But it also is so much more than that. I mean, I love creating the atmosphere of a world, but it's also so much of it is storytelling, and it's about it's also a managerial role as well. I'm a head of a department which has lighting team, the grips, and all the camera assistants, and various specialist camera operators, and so it's also it's a leadership role which I'm in charge of creating the look of a show.
No, it's very multifaceted, isn't it? And it's certainly one of the biggest roles that you can have within a film set. But I think you're right. It's like you've got the art element, the technical element, and then also the people element, and you're kind of trying to run around balancing all these things all the time.
Yes.
So when do you become part of the process? Do you become involved like right at the beginning, pre-production?
Yeah, well, it varies. Yeah, sometimes it's as a production is financed and ready to shoot, they then go out to a crew and start finding the best people for the role. But I often also find that I'm often coming on board a project very early on stages, particularly if it's a director that I've worked before. Where you will often start talking about a project, and I'll be involved in some early development, or read a script and ask an opinion on what I thought of it. And we'll often do lookbooks and various things which will help to get a project financed as well, which isn't something all cinematographers will do, but it's something that I often find myself involved in.
Is that, I mean, I guess if you're pitching yourself, if you're kind of going for a job and you're not, you haven't had a past working relationship with the director, is that something you would do? You would put a lookbook together with your ideas and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, more of the lookbooks I'm doing are with the director once I'm
Mhm.
already on board to then show financiers or for cast if we're trying to attract some higher end cast, because you know there's a, if you're one of a pile of 30 scripts on someone's desk, it's material like that that really helps you stand out. But it
Yeah.
is something that's become more and more a thing for cinematographers to pitch on a job, which is something
Mm.
I hadn't really done much in the past. Usually it's on the strength of your show reel and your previous work and
Right.
having a meeting with the director. But there's been the occasional job where the director and producer want to meet a range of DPs and they'll ask all of them to pitch on it.
Mm.
And I've often sometimes not got a job because I was shooting something else and didn't have a lot of time to put in
Yeah.
as much time as others did, and then would later be told, oh, that person just did a really great
Mm.
pitch, so we gave them the
Yeah.
gig, which is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it is, because it's an interest. Like, I can wave my hands around and describe how I'd shoot a show, and it would just it can mean so much more to actually present a
Yeah.
little booklet or a PDF of imagery, and particularly
Yeah.
isolating different scenes and how you may shoot them. I mean, that's just such a better communication tool.
Definitely. I mean,
Mm.
people are visual beings, really, at the end of the day. I
Mm.
think that's why film relates to people so well. So how long have you been a cinematographer?
Professionally, 20 years now. But I was shooting as a kid. I was making movies with my toys and little video cameras and doing little things. I mean, I actually originally started out wanting to be a director. Well, I thought it was a director was the thing for
Yeah.
that I wanted to do, and I just found more and more from as a student. I went to art school, and there was as an art school student with my eye on directing. I just found more and more that it was the directing the visuals that was really where my passion was. Having my hands on the camera and making those decisions with the lighting and the atmosphere was really what I enjoyed the most. And so I found that being a director of photography was my thing. So yeah, it's about 20 years now.
So you knew from quite a young age that you wanted to do something very creative, something film orientated.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I didn't really know what it all entailed when I first started doing it, but I just had an absolute love of movies, and I loved creating worlds that didn't necessarily exist. And
Yeah.
I had a pretty good imagination as a kid, and I just wanted to be able to express those. I think there was a point there where I thought I wanted to be a painter or a designer, but I wasn't able to express myself as much as you can when you've got a camera. And I mean, also I wasn't necessarily that good at painting, perhaps. Maybe that could have been part of it. But I think that's the thing for most filmmakers. You've got a vision in your head and you want to share it with people, and you find ways of expressing that.
Was that quite an easy choice for you then, to go to art school, to go to film?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know what was the clearest and best path coming out of high school, and I mean, I thought it was to go to university and study film. There's a lot of universities that have film courses. A lot of them are probably more theory based than practical. I ended up going to an art school in Australia and in Western Australia called the WA School of Art and Design, and they had a media design course, which I kind of fell into it. It wasn't what I thought I was wanting to do, but in reflection, it was the perfect course for me. It started off with art history, and we did painting, graphic design, typography. We started doing stills photography in black and white and printing our own photos before getting to the point where we were starting to make our own films, and we were shooting them on 16mm film.
Right.
And it was such a great journey because it gave me much more of a grounding and understanding of art in general. I think at the time I thought, oh, art history so boring, but then the wealth of knowledge that I've gained from looking at the great masters and looking at craft, looking at how they compose that painting from hundreds of years ago, and I can see it and I've identified it. So yeah, having an arts background and a more practical approach to filmmaking was good. There was still a lot of art theory, and then I went to film school after that, the Australian Film, Television, Radio School,
I see.
which is a postgraduate school. But I went in there already very clearly knowing I wanted to be a cinematographer, and they only accepted 4 in each category: 4 cinematographers, 4 directors, 4 editors, writers. Right. Yeah, so I was ready to really focus on what they were teaching there, which was much more there was a lot of film theory and we watched a lot of films, but it was getting right into the nitty gritty and making your own high end quality film productions.
And those kind of first 4 or 5 years out of postgrad for you, what were they like? Like, what was the biggest learning curve that hit you?
Yeah, I was actually very fortunate coming out of film school, because even when I was a student there, and I knew that the thing that would get me progressing in my career was having a really great show reel, and I was focusing on shooting stuff that'd be great for show reel, but just cutting show reels as well. And I've been cutting show reels for a long time now, that I feel like I've got a real good idea of what's a good show reel. But early on at film school,
what is a good show reel?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the things are like shorter is better. Like you want to give a great snippet. I see it as an ad for your work. If someone's looking at, I've got a choice of 10 cinematographers, the first thing they'll do usually is look at their list of credits, but then look at a show reel. Not all cinematographers do show reels, and a lot of them will get to a position that their work speaks for them, and it's not necessary. But for me, it's like I like to show within the edit that I've got a storytelling ability, not just making pretty pictures, but can really tell a story through camera movement and framing and juxtaposition of images. So I'll cut it in a way that kind of shows a little bit of a hint at a narrative. But I also think that it's very important to only show your best work and the kind of work you want to do more of, rather than just everything you've ever done, because that will kind of, I mean, people want to see that you've got variety, but they don't want to see that you've got too much variety or stuff that's not really in where they want to be positioning their project. And the thing that some advice I was given a long time ago by another cinematographer was that just load your show reel with as many famous faces as you get to photograph, because people look at it and they go, oh wow, he or she must be good, they've worked with these people, and if it's good enough to work with them, then they must be good at what they do.
Exactly.
So
it does sell. Unfortunately, that's what they always say about film packets for film festivals and stuff like that. They're just like, list everything they've ever done. That's a big name.
But coming out of film school, I was very lucky that I had it was probably one of those where the door opens in front of you and you leap on an opportunity. But I just finished cutting a show reel in the cinematography students cinematography students room, and I checked my emails, and there was this email that had been forwarded to me from a German production company that was looking for DPs all around the world in different countries to shoot this international project where they had characters all interacting with each other, and they wanted to find filmmakers in each of those locations, and they were looking for an Australian cinematographer to shoot in Melbourne. And I was straight away like, this sounds amazing. And so I sent my show reel straight to them, and this was at film school, so this is before you could upload it to Vimeo, what didn't exist, so you had to post a tape. And the producers really loved my my reel, and I got the job on that, and that just led on to so many other things. I got along really well with the producers, which helped, and we had a lot of fun together on that. And so they invited me to come from Australia, travel to Germany, and start shooting some commercials with their production company.
Amazing.
And I was still just coming out of film school at this point, and I was loving it. I had such a great time starting to do those commercials. But I did have a point where it was sort of that fork in the road where I knew I could keep doing this, and it'd be a great life of making really great money doing these big high-end commercials. But my real passion was making drama and doing feature films, and I knew that staying in Germany wasn't going to necessarily lead on to that in the way that I wanted it to. So I went back to Australia and finished film school. And actually, shortly after coming back, I teamed up with one of the directors there and shot a short film, which probably wasn't even my best short film, but we got along really well, and we just had such a great time on it. And he just happened to be the first of the directors that I'd been working with who got the big break where they were offered a feature film, which he wrote himself and got financed. And that was on the back of him doing a short film, which was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Short Film. Which he didn't win, but it sort of opened up all these opportunities for him.
And
he told me,
work.
Yeah, well, what he said was brilliant. So he flew to Los Angeles and he was at the at all the parties, and he said that the number one question that was always being asked was, well, what's next, or what have you got a feature? What are you going to do? And he realized, I've really got to get a pitch together for a job, and he just had a little idea for one, but enough that he could do the 30-second elevator pitch to people. And someone said, that sounds brilliant. When can I read a script? And so then he started writing that script, and that was the first feature that got up. And for me, we had a really good working relationship, but it's not often that a studio or producers feel confident to have a first-time director and a first-time cinematographer do their first feature together. But I was lucky to have had a pretty good show reel, and I'd just won an award just when they were starting to make their decisions. It was a pretty big award for a short film that I did, and they thought, well, let's take a chance on this team, and we got our first feature, and that's really sort of the first hurdle. Although, like what a lot of filmmakers will often say is that getting your first job is really tough, but getting your second one is even harder. I mean, unless that first film is a breakout, box office hit, then you start to get judged by what the last thing you did. Your first film, you're still an unknown. You could be that incredible artist who's going to do something amazing and surprise everyone. But after you've done that, it's like, well, that's the best thing they've done so far. They can only get better, hopefully. Or if it was a terrible disaster, it could very easily be the end of your career right there.
Oh goodness, that's got to be quite terrifying. Really, is like you're as good as your last work. Really. That's.
It is, yeah. Well, that's something else that I've sort of learned over the years, is that there is a lot of it is about perception and framing. That just like putting famous faces in your show reel just gives people a perception that, well, they must be good if they're working with famous people. It's the same thing, that if you've made a disaster, you can surely find ways to recover from that. I mean, the big studios do it all the time, where they have made a terrible film that they've spent a lot of money on, but they market it and they spend a lot of money on changing the people's perception, and still people rock up to the cinemas and watch it, and it makes hundreds of millions of dollars.
They put all the good scenes in the trailers.
Or just start telling everyone you are going to love it. This is going to be great, without actually it genuinely being a fact.
I guess not everything can be 100% a failure. There's going to be some good lessons and good material to take out of there somewhere. I mean, one way to look at it is to say you had a very lucky first few years, but the other way to look at it is that you consistently were just trying to learn and up yourself and work until you hit that point.
Well, that's very true.
So you've got the job, that. I guess, is the first step for a cinematographer, much like a director, to kind of sit down with the script and just break it down?
Yeah, to a degree. I actually think the first step is I do read the script, and when reading it, I see the movie playing out in my mind, and I start getting ideas. But I think that more important than going to a director and pitching your ideas and your vision for it is to first listen to the director where their vision and ideas, for two reasons. One, that they've probably spent a lot of time thinking about it, and you want to be open to it and not already thinking, well, this is the only way to do things. Okay. But secondly, if you're still pitching on a job, and if I go in and start telling a director, this is how I see this film looking, and it's not what they had in their mind, then that could be the point right there and then that they say, oh, this is not the right person to work with.
Right. So ears open, first of all.
Yeah. And directors, there's all different types of directors that I've worked with. I've worked with some that are very visual and will be very specific, and they'll say, I want this scene to look like this scene from another movie, or this work of art, or this other thing that I've done. Or I've worked with directors that have done test shoots on their own back with a DSLR, and they've already done some tests, particularly if it's a high concept or got visual effects in it, so they've already got a pretty good solid idea of what they want. What they're wanting me to do is then to either expand upon that, or to be able to take what's their initial idea and just improve upon it, or make it better, or deliver exactly what they're asking for. But then I've also worked with other directors who are just really, they're very much about performance and the storytelling, and they'll leave a lot more of the visual, the cinematography, coverage, lighting decisions up to me, which I quite like that as well. Except if the director doesn't really know what they want, and then you start doing something and then they see it and they're like, no, I don't really like it. That's not a good situation.
No.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you get the second type of director then, someone who's like, okay, bring what you've got to the table. Do you look at a scene and you pick out, say, the highlight or like the key moment of the scene, or are you thinking more about what the audience is thinking? You're like, okay, they need to feel sad at this moment. How do I show sadness in this frame?
Yeah, well, there's certainly all parts of that. Yeah, I mean, something which I've started doing often is, well, as I'm reading a script, is sort of identify key moments in it, which the writers obviously already thought about these things, but it's good for me to find my own little moments where it's the peak emotional moment for the protagonist, or just where's that turning point, where's that little moment where the audience, it flips, where the audience thinks one thing's going on or it changes. And to identify those points, then you can start to think about different ways of doing it. You can look at other films and see how they've tried these things. But I think one thing that I discovered quite early on is quite important, is that when you've identified that key emotional moment where you want to have your biggest close-up in the film, that's when you save that big close-up for that moment. You don't want to be shooting a whole lot of coverage of your actor here, and then when it gets to the bigger moment where it's earned that shot, well, you've already kind of used that and you've blown it. So you can only go so close. So yeah, and then you also look at, I mean, sometimes, and a lot of it's instinctual as well, but you'll find some scenes you really feel like it just feels like it should be sitting a lot wider and the audience gets a feel of the geography and the location, whereas other scenes feel they should be tighter. Sometimes emotionally you want the audience to feel like things are lifting, or there's a sense of relief, or it's the time for the crane shot or the drone shot where you to in the same way that people's emotions are soaring, you have the camera do the same thing.
So does that kind of instinctual decision making, does that come with time and practice and just studying different films and that kind of thing to see how they're drawing out those emotions and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It comes from experience and just from what we learn and what we know. And I mean, that when early on in my career, I'd often find that I'd be emulating what other filmmakers had done because I knew it worked. And as with more experience, you start to find your own little ways of doing things and try out other ways of communicating similar things. Sometimes I found myself gravitating to a certain camera position and just instinctually just feels right. And then later when reflecting, think, oh, well, actually that makes sense on a lot of other levels, psychologically or emotionally, or in the storytelling, it makes sense for the camera to be doing that, but it's not always something that I've consciously thought through and done it that way.
Do you tend to experiment quite a lot? Are you quite an experimental cinematographer?
Yeah, I go through different phases. I think it's interesting as an artist. I think you do have different likes at different points, and once you've tried something, maybe you never don't want to do that anymore, and you try other things. But then also filmmaking is also, I mean, sometimes I've got a job on a production because of something I've done before, and then not that you want to recreate it, but you already know what works and you know why it works, and so then you just lock into that. The thing about that I find more and more, I mean, I've been doing some TV series more so than feature films lately, and TV series, which I really enjoy, and all the ones that I've been brought on to shoot, they've always wanted it to have a feature film cinema quality and a look to it. But you're generally moving very fast, shooting quite fast, and so you don't really have a lot of time on the set to start experimenting or trying out new things. You really got one shot at it, and it better work because you're not going to get another. You're not going to have time to try anything else. So more of that experimentation happens in the pre-production. If we want to try some little technique or try something different, shoot some tests, whether it's just getting one of the crew to stand in and trying
Right.
something with the camera, or whether it's something you can orchestrate a little bit more and hire an actor and actually construct something and do some tests in post. But really, that's the time to experiment rather than
It
on
does
set.
seem the trend nowadays, doesn't it? TV is becoming feature films, but in half the production time.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But speaking of TV series, I know you've worked on the Luminaries. So can we use that almost as a bit of a case study? It's like
Sure.
how did you bring to life that kind of 1850s visual? Like what was your kind of process within that?
Yeah, well, it's first sort of, it started when just sort of finding the visual for that time period was we traveled to a lot of locations. When we first arrived in New Zealand, director, production designer, and myself, we were scouting locations for where we were going to shoot, but it was also an opportunity to start doing a bit of research and learning a few things. And I think a real key moment for us was when we went to the South Island of New Zealand, where the story's set, where there is actually there's a lot of love for the book. So there's a lot of people go to this place, Hokitika, because they've read the book and they've heard about it.
Yeah.
But it's a historical place where the story's set, and it's got an incredible history there. But they've got a little museum there, and they've got the most incredible archive of photographs. And that became our kicking off point, was looking at the photos from the era, and they were amazing. And there was a lot of atmosphere in them, and there was a lot of texture, and they're all black and white. But it just really, the first things we all identified was like, look at the way the shape of the landscape is there, and it's so rugged, and looks like New Zealand. It doesn't look like any other place. And we really want to capture that. And then look at the texture that's on these buildings, and look at the faces and the costumes and just the dirt and texture on these costumes too. And so then that started to inform things. And whenever I've done a few period productions now, from medieval to ancient Rome to 20s and 1920s or what have you. And the first thing that I always look at as a cinematographer is just historically, what was these people's and these characters' lives like in this place at that time. Was electricity available to them then? And if not, then how did they light their homes and their interiors? Was it all oil lamps or candles, or did they have fixtures above with flame, or is it all just on their tables, and was it fire? And then and it's a really fascinating thing that I really love, history, and then looking at how architecture is such a part of it's like so many places are designed for light, that before you had the opportunity to flick a switch and have a light in your room, it was all about windows. And so many places were designed with windows with a certain aspect to get the nice light into the house. And some of them have windows on both sides, so you get morning and afternoon light. And it's just a point to, I mean, that's the number one thing, is when you're lighting a production, is where your light sources from. So yeah, I was sort of really looking at it's 1860. I think we start. I can't remember exactly, but it was all candles and gas lamps. And I worked very closely with production designer Felicity Abbott, who just brought so much amazing ideas to the design of the interiors, from the texture of wallpapers to the colors and where windows were and how light would come in, and sort of together we'd start talking about how we can design a space to just look really great on camera.
I've got to say, I think with all the kind of modern technologies and lighting and stuff available, it sounds like a bit of a pain in the ass having to kind of include the oil lamps and candles and all that kind of thing. Is it really quite tough filming or trying to emulate this kind of 19th century feel?
It can be, yeah. I mean, we really didn't want the Luminaries to be a dusty, musty period film either. We wanted it to be a bit sexy and to have it be really textural world, and we still wanted to feel like a contemporary show, but still feel true to the period. So it's just finding ways to do that without, and the lighting isn't always accurate. It's not always just there's only one candle in the room and that's where the light's coming from. That would become at least the influence of it and the starting point. But we'd have a bit of fun with it. It gets complicated if it's a scene where an actor, I mean, the director and I, we talked a lot on that project too, and we've done a few period films where it is about candles and oil lamps. Like we never wanted to have the Wee Willie Winky walking with the candles kind of down the stairs kind of shots, which that does start to get a little bit complicated, and you start to have to build lights into your candles, or you got to have someone following with a light to illuminate the face, because the candle, well, it can give enough light to light a face with digital cameras, but then if you expose for the light from the candle itself is really overexposed, and it's not really a balanced look. So you try to balance the flame with with what's happening on faces, and so it can get a bit complicated. And it also means that your color palette is limited within blue for daylight and moonlight, maybe a little bit of green and moonlight, and then it's just warm light for fire and flame. And so really it's a blue and red, yellow world that or in terms of lighting anyway, that you are when you're working in that time.
So in terms of color palette, is that primarily your territory, or is that across director, production designer, and yourself?
Yeah, and the costume designer too, very much so. Yeah, and makeup falls into that category too. So it's part of it for everyone, and I think it really starts with a conversation between, well, if the director's got some really solid ideas, it starts with the director, but then it's the production designer that will often offer up a lot of color palette in terms of the space, the walls, the details, the set dressing. And then I'm more about what light we're adding to that, which has color. I mean, if we're doing a modern film which had neons or fluoros, or then you're introducing greens or reds or pink, all kinds of colors can come into the world that way. But it is so important to talk about those color palettes, and also just about the atmosphere in a room with the costume designer too, because you don't want to be in a really dark room and they've got a dark costume, and then they're like, well, I can't see all that beautiful detail that we've designed. I mean, we all share a lot of images early on too, say this is what I'm thinking for this scene, and the production designer's got sketches and concept art coming together, and so it's a constant communication.
Definitely.
And if there is a scene which you're going to do something quite different, then I'd always flag that early on with all the departments to say, like, just we're going to do something different here, and hopefully we can do some tests in pre-production so we can see how everything works.
Definitely. So based around the phrase "fix it in post," how much wiggle room is there to get things wrong as a cinematographer? Because I'm thinking kind of like in today's world where we've got filters and cropping and all that kind of thing, does that actually help you, or do you have to get it right on the spot?
Yeah, I mean, my philosophy will be enhance it in post. I mean, if you've really a lot of things you can do, but you can't make something that's just terrible into something amazing in post. The luminaries, for example, because we did have a pretty tight shooting schedule, we were shooting a lot of scenes every day. There's often a lot of things that I would want to do in terms of lighting that you couldn't always have time to do on set, but I knew that what was capable of doing in post-production, and knew how much time it would take or whether it was going to be expensive. And so you can lean on that a little bit and make it part of your tool kit. Like often, like talking about color palettes, or just, in terms of atmosphere and whatnot, if you're lighting a face with a light which is meant to be a candle light, and there's just too much light on the back wall, like generally you'd need to start cutting that light and controlling it, but knowing that, we can do a little bit of work in post, and we can just darken that wall. It's going to save us 20 minutes. Then to do it on set, then that's a great use of post.
So you
there too.
Have it in the back of your mind as a tool, you say. So would
you absolutely
script supervisor or something saying, oh, just make a note, we need to tweak that?
Yeah, I might do that, or it might just be something which I keep in my notes, and when I'm in post-production doing the grade, which I'll supervise with a colorist, then that's my opportunity to say, hey, I want to cut some light off that wall, I want to do some more beautifying to something within a shot. And post-production doesn't have an infinite budget either. You can't just keep saying, oh, well, we'll fix that in post, or do that there, because eventually it's going to get to the point where you've spent choose what we're going to do and we can't do everything. Which it's interesting. There's been a few shows where often, I mean, there was a recent one, saw a shot where, in fact, I didn't even pick it when I saw the show, but it was some news article pointed out you could see yellow lines on the road in a period show, and they shouldn't be. Yeah, you saw that. But I just know that, well, I can imagine it must have got to a situation, because they've spent so much money and done some amazing visual effects in there, that it would have got to a point where it's like, well, do we have to fix everything? And because that's going to cost some extra money, and maybe that's one that no one's going to notice until that comes out. And then there's sort of a fine line between perfection and how much can we get away with the audience not noticing, I guess.
So you're there through the entirety of post as well?
No, not through the entirety, but I'll come in for my my grade, which is usually on a movie. It's usually 10 days, where I'll have two weeks of grading, and I'll get an opportunity to supervise some of the visual effects as well.
And for those who don't know what grading means,
like in a basic sense, some people describe it as Photoshop for motion picture. You can do all the same things, but it's also like, you can't quite do everything you do in Photoshop. You got to be really smart about it, but it is basically balancing the images, and you can, make something a little darker, make something a little brighter. If the red's too red, you can desaturate it a little bit there, or you can highlight, you can bring out people's eyes if they're a bit too shadowed. And it's a whole toolkit of things, but it is one of those things that you could spend months messing around or playing with things. Or if you've done a really lousy job when you've shot it, there's only so much you can do and so much time you can spend on something before you have to just move on and do the rest of the
so grading is like a coverall term for fix-ups and touch-ups and that kind of thing.
Yeah, in a sense, but more specifically, it's about just the overall balancing of the image and colors, and
very exciting. And then it's up to the director to piece it all together.
Yeah, well, with the editor, that's until the edit is locked off. I mean, sometimes we'll start early on, we'll start to do some look development, which is something we'll do, but you don't want to be messing around with takes that aren't going to be in the final production, or scenes that end up being dropped. So it's not until the whole production is locked off that you'll do that. It's the same things. Audio would do the same thing, where they'd be doing the mixing and mastering and cleaning up the sound and bringing up a bit of dialogue and adding sound effects. It's the same kind of thing, but for pictures.
Yeah. Say it comes out, it premieres, all of that. Are you tending to be quite reflective about the work you do and kind of criticizing and learning from what you've done, or do you just go, let's start next one?
No, I quite like rewatching stuff that I've done. Yeah, not everyone's like that. Some people think I'm a sucker for punishment. Why would you want to do that to yourself? But I enjoy it. And yeah, there's always those cringy moments where you think, oh my goodness, I could have done something better or different. Or I remember that day, if there hadn't been those circumstances, we would have done a much better job. And there's those little moments, but no, I think I generally take pride in my work, and so like to sit back and enjoy it. And there's definitely something to be said for sitting in an audience, particularly if the audience doesn't know that the filmmakers are in the room. I mean, hopefully their reactions are positive and good.
Yeah.
But to hear someone laugh at the right moment, or gasp at the bit where you wanted them to gasp, or just hear little comments of wow, or that's such a joy.
Good. You say you're working more on TV now as opposed to features, but do you is it a very different process to preparing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't only do TV, but that's just what I've had for the last couple of, I've done TV shows that generally take up a good part of a year with my work involved on them. And I do enjoy it. I mean, where it's been different is that the shooting schedule is much longer, and you're doing multiple episodes, which can be quite a challenge, and it's interesting, and it's a real challenge for script supervisors for continuity and for costume and makeup, particularly if you've got a character like in the Luminaries who Anna Weatherall just degrades a lot throughout it. And one of the things we said we needed to do within that show, because it does change, it does move between time frames throughout the show, is that we needed little signifiers that she was wearing her striped dress when she arrives fresh faced, and then once that dress is gone, she's in her red dress when she's turned into this more vampy, sort of her journey begins. And then when she arrives in her Katika, she gets given the pink dress, and then at the end, after the murder, she's always wearing this black dress. And so it became, and also her, and with each look there was a different makeup look, and so she became the kind of signifier of which time frame we're in by what she's wearing and how she looks. So that's something which obviously needs to be tracked.
And were you changing types of frame and lighting as you go with these time jumps?
Yeah, well, certainly we wanted to light her more flatteringly when it was appropriate, and then make it and enhance the sort of degradation of her look with lighting as we go along. But then also we talked about with Claire, the director, we talked about different styles of camera operating throughout it, that's a lot more controlled and smooth moving earlier on, when she's a lot more stable and she's fresh-eyed and she feels like she's got the world ahead of her. And then as she starts to degrade, shots started to get tighter on her, but they also had a bit more handheld move, or some of them are a bit more rocky, or she's often consuming laudanum and opium, and we wanted the camera to reflect that, just in subtle ways, not in too heavy-handed. But I mean, for me, my philosophy is that the camera should always be reflecting the emotional state of the characters within the shot, and if there's a lot of energy in the shot, then the camera should have matching energy. If it's subdued and it's a lot more stable, then the camera should also be stable.
So we did that. To simplify, is that moving from like a standing rig to handheld, or can you move around on a rig, or how would you kind of go about that?
Things like that. Yeah, well, we had a Steadicam on there, and we had a gyro, like a stabilizer, a Ronin it was. So those are all stabilizers which you can do elaborate moves quite smoothly. And then handheld when we wanted things to be a little bit more rough as well. Yeah, handheld sort of like can get overused a little bit and can draw a bit of attention to itself, but I feel like when it's at the right rhythm with the performance and the actors, that it actually feels like it's got a bit more energy in the camera is the idea, at least.
Do you ever have a bit of a nerdy moment with the tech? Do you ever go, oh, I really like working with this one?
Yeah, all the time.
I do. Crane shot?
Yeah, well, that's sort of the thing that I feel like need to be a little bit restrained with, because you don't want to be using crane shots, or maybe you do want to be using crane shots all the time, but like it sort of has to have its place and needs to be used when it's going to be appropriate. And yeah,
one thing I've certainly noticed with people trying to do lots of filming during the COVID pandemics is that you're suddenly watching TV and everything is just drone shots. People are like, social distancing, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of drones, and I've done quite a bit where I'll be a camera operator and there'll be a drone pilot. Yeah. But for me, I feel like the drone should just really be an extension of what a crane can take you to a certain height. A full scale chopper can get you to only to a certain depth, I guess. But the drone sort of fills in that space in between and can get closer to the actors than a helicopter can. But I think that's also something you don't want to be overusing or getting too fancy and throwing the audience around.
Yeah, I guess you've got to it's almost like seasickness, really. It's like too much and you're just distracting from the storytelling, isn't it? Sometimes you just need those stable, quiet moments.
Well, yeah, because also often filmmakers don't want to draw attention to the techniques. Often you want the audience to be feeling what the characters are feeling. And then if you start doing elaborate camera moves that are just, the audience are thinking, oh, wow, drone shot, then you've kind of snapped them out of the moment right there and then by doing that.
Do you have a favorite type of scene that you like to film? Like, do you prefer the more quiet dramatic scenes or the fun action scenes?
Yeah, I think it varies, and I like a lot of variety, I guess. But I think for me, the most satisfying is when you do see that stellar performance that just really moves you or makes you laugh, and really that comes down to handing over to the actors and really creating a shot and an environment where the actor can feel comfortable enough to be able to give that that amazing performance. And it's often that's not the most showy cinematography, but it's often the more memorable moments when you think back on a film that you saw. It's it's a bit of a classic quote. It's, people don't always remember what you say, but they'll remember how you feel. I think the same thing happens with cinematography. They're not always remembering, wow, how cool were the drone shots and the crane shots, but they're thinking, wow, that made me feel,
I
great.
mean, just thinking to your work on, say, Ophelia, there's not going to be that many kind of big droney action shots in that, but very heavy emotional moments.
Yeah, I think there's only one drone shot in there at the opening, and we had a couple of crane moments, but we picked them where we felt like it really made a difference, and then the rest of it was when you're intimate with the emotion and with the characters.
Definitely. I mean, I tend to think of that film as kind of Daisy Ridley's first thing, Yeah. You must be pretty proud to see her gone on to Star Wars and that kind of thing now.
Mm-hmm. Well, she squeezed that in between Star Wars. Actually, she'd already done. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, no, I thought Ophelia came up first. Oh. What qualities would you say are essential to doing your job?
It's an interesting one because it's a real balance between technical, creative, and artistry. I think it means a lot. I mean, it's important to have a real creative mind and to have a bit of artistry and a bit of flair, and want to do things different and beautifully and create that. But I think to be able to do that, it's very important to be a good communicator. I've met a lot of great student DPs who do the most incredible work, and I've been so blown away and impressed with them. But then I see that they struggle when they're working with a team or with a gaffer to describe what they want, or to really achieve it on a bigger scale, or because it gets to a point where it's not something, it's just you, a camera, and a few friends, that you need to start bringing in a bigger team, and then they've got their people within the team. And communication is so key, because when you're trying to shoot between 4 minutes up to 7 minutes of footage or scenes a day, you don't really have a lot of time where if you've communicated things badly and you need to change or make a new plan, you don't really have that time to change. So you've got to be really clear about what you want, I guess. Yeah.
I guess this is where it comes in handy, having a really good relationship with the director. I mean, just like you and your wife Claire, like you've got to be sharing this creative mind. It's got to be in sync.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, that's for working with Claire, we did Ophelia together and the Luminaries, among other projects, but we do the most of our creative talking in pre-production or on the way to set, and really early on in pre-production, when we'll watch a lot of movies together and we'll talk through a lot of things. Because when we are on set, she's focusing on her actors, and then I've got to be watching her back, and I'm either setting up exactly what we talked about, or she'll be, like, you set up a shot and I'll direct the actors and let's get this show on the road. And so it is there needs to be a sort of a shorthand of communication that I feel like we've achieved, but also just knowing each other's style well enough that we know we've got our default go-to, what's going to work, or that she trusts my instincts. But there'll always be times where it's like, what are you doing? That's not what I would thought you would set up. What's going on? I'm like, oh, okay, I would have to have a quick change of plans.
Can you leave those moments on set, or do they have to follow you?
I think you have to leave them on set. Yeah, but all the
discussions, they stay there.
Yeah, although we don't really have a cut-off time. It's not like we leave set and now it's just family time. It's like not so much anymore, but early on when we were making films together, she would wake up in the middle of the night with some wild idea and want to tell me about it, and then I'd be like, oh wow, maybe it's not the best thing living with the director. Maybe it's better to go home at the end of the day and switch off. But then also that's such a beautiful opportunity where you just get to spend time where you can be inspired and talk about things in a way that you wouldn't if you were isolating separate, in isolation, doing your thing.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any genres or types of work that you haven't touched on yet, but you're desperate to kind of work your way towards?
Yeah, well, I have actually been doing so much period. I know even the next film we're about to do is it's set in the 1920s.
Right.
I would really like to do something so far removed from that. I mean, I love a psychological thriller. I think that's what I'd like to be, and maybe one that's not candles and gaslight, but maybe a futuristic psychological thriller. But I think that's the thing for as an artist, it's good to mix things up and change, and like some of the great painters, you go through different periods and your blue period or what have you. So I've been going through a period film period. So yeah, I'd love to try and do different things, because that's the other thing is it's actually pretty easy to sort of fall back on what you're used to and what works, and that definitely has its advantages. In fact, something I was talking to Claire, director, my wife slash director, recently, that because a lot of filmmaking is like you arrive in the morning, you're really enthusiastic, you've got a shot list, you got your plan, and then you start doing things, and then inevitably things change or someone has a different idea and you sort of start to stray from that plan. But then in the last hour of the day, and you've still got a number of shots or even a number of different scenes you got to do, really that's the time where you just often will have to just go and rely on your instincts or rely on your plan and your experience, because you're having to make decisions in an instant, and sometimes you're having to make decisions for other people, particularly if the sun's setting and you've got 3 shots to do and the actor's ready to do something, and it's like, well, we just got to put the camera here and we got to make it work. And that's really what, when you do rely on every little bit of experience and everything that you've learned and what has worked for you in the past and what doesn't work for you, and you pull out all your bag of tricks. And I mean, I've had that happen too, where, both the director and myself will look at the monitor and say, no, it's just, that doesn't look right. It's not really working. And it is exactly what you had talked about setting up, and you've just got to make a quick decision. Do you just stick with that plan and go with what you don't think's working, or is there something is there a little tweak you can make? Is there something different you can do just to elevate it and make it better? And sometimes you've got a little box of tricks in your mind, or a little physical box of tricks next to the camera that you start pulling out things, or go to the lens, always looks nice, and do things like that.
Well, I guess this is it. It's like, ironically, like you've broken down the film into these shot lists, right? Into tiny little moments. But even when you're doing one shot at a time, you've got to think of the big picture coming together.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest responsibility a director has. If you're directing a 90-minute plus movie and you start on day one and you're going down a certain path, that when you're halfway through that shoot or right near the end and you're shooting a scene that's going to cut with something you've done earlier on, you kind of you really got to be on top of where, because the audience isn't watching it over the 3 months that you've taken to make it. They're watching it in an instant. They're watching in that time frame. And so there's often been times where we will set up a shot because I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do something like that? And then when a director's looking at it, they're like, actually, because we've already had this emotional moment, this actually doesn't really work, or it's not serving where the character has come from. And that really is ultimately the director's vision, is that whole emotional journey for not just the characters, but for the audience and for the visual style.
I guess kind of day one of filming, that's truly when you kind of lock in what this film is going to feel like, because then you have to just contextualize everything towards that first day.
Yeah, to a degree. And that is often why a first AD will often pick, and they'll talk with the cinematographer and director, but often you won't start on the first opening scene of your movie on day one, and it won't be the most dramatic moment that you'll start there. It's usually something where you can play around a little bit, or it's not. So sometimes that's that first day you end up picking up a shot that you didn't get, or it didn't work, or it ends up being a deleted scene. But you sort of do need to have that little bit of time to find your footing and for everyone to get in their groove. And that's actually why one of the reasons I really love the camera testing period, which is usually the week before, where you're not only getting to try things out, it's also when the producers and the financiers, they start seeing the first frames of what the show's going to look like, and they can say, okay, well, I like where it's going, or they can say, oh, hang on a minute, that's not what we thought you were going to do, which hopefully that doesn't happen. But it's also a little bit of a test run for the crew, and everyone gets to have a little bit of time together without the pressure of being day one on set. So well, it's kind of the icebreaker.
Yeah, I mean, everyone needs a practice day, don't they? So it's great that they build that in for you, because I mean, my background's in theatre, so there's always a good 4-week rehearsal period for everyone to become comfortable and to trust each other. I guess without those days on the film set, it's not gonna. It would make for very, very tough jobs.
Yeah,
definitely. Okay, one last question for you, just to kind of tie in with our purpose, which is, what are the good, bad, and mad things about you?
For me, definitely the good is, as a filmmaker, I get to go to places and just travel, or even just going to places, just subtle place. Like just recently, we've been location scouting up in the Midlands, around Stoke-on-Trent and Birmingham, but they've been letting us go into these old derelict warehouses and buildings that some of them haven't been opened up for God knows how long, and just to walk through these incredible historic places and get the doors open to go into rooms that people haven't seen for so long is such a privilege. And getting to meet people that, if I wasn't a filmmaker, I wouldn't be having an occasion to have a conversation, not just filmmakers, but just people, anyone. I think that is such a great and a privilege to have that kind of opportunity. That's definitely the good, I think. The bad, I mean, it is such a roller coaster industry. Lockdowns and COVID aside, it's like you never really know that the next job's for real, or you don't even know when it's coming, and there can be long breaks between work, and that can be really tough. And I've been on a number of projects. In fact, probably I've been attached to more projects that haven't happened than ones that actually have. And that can be really tough, particularly if you start turning down lots of great work, and then that one job that you've been clinging onto just disappears, then that's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's good.
And mad. I mean, that. Yeah, I mean, all of the above. That's pretty mad as well as good and bad. But some of the mad things that I like, there's times where I'm sitting there on operating the camera, or just waiting for action to be called, and I look around and think, wow, there's all these people here. Streets are closed, and we've got people are kicked out of their street. They got to move all their cars, and we're just, for this one little moment, and this, everyone goes quiet, everyone's silent, and it's just this little moment where the actor gets to do their thing. And I mean, it's like theater for a brief second as well. And I think that's where it's just silent. We're an audience, the camera's an audience member, and these incredible things, whether it's a big stunt or it's an emotional moment or it's just a little bit of fun. I mean, it's pretty mad that you get these opportunities to do these crazy things.
Little magic moments, really. And I think that's why so many of us try to be a part of this industry, is because it's difficult to get those little feelings elsewhere.
That's true.
Thank you so much, Denson. You've been an absolute superstar, and I am sorry about the bad connection.
That's all right.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Good Bad Mad podcast. Please subscribe to check out the next episode, or leave a review if you liked it. You can find us on Instagram at goodbadmad, or at goodbadmad.com for additional resources and information. See you next time.